I am Ryan Woodard from Sioux Falls. I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the South Dakota Humanities Council, which produces the annual Festival of Books. We are so pleased you joined us for our virtual 2021 event. We would like to acknowledge, first and foremost, that this program comes to you from ground which is the homeland of the Oceti Sakowin, the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota people. The South Dakota Humanities Council honors and appreciates the indigenous people who have the longest relationship to this place. Before this event gets underway, I'd like to share some housekeeping details. We ask that you keep your microphone muted throughout the event to minimize background noise. If you'd like to ask questions or share comments with today's presenters, please type them in the chat section on Zoom, which you can open by clicking on the conversation bubble at the bottom of your screen, or in the comments section on Facebook. We will pass along as many as possible at the end of the session. If you wish, we will also allow you to unmute at the end of the session so you can ask your questions directly. We encourage you to buy books by our presenting authors at your local independent bookstore. Our official festival booksellers are Books A Million and the Birdcage Bookstore and Mercantile, both in Rapid City. You can also buy directly from authors and publishers. Look for links in the chat. To help us continue to improve the festival, we'd appreciate you filling out an evaluation form. We'll share a link in the chat section on Zoom, and we'll also email you a link to this survey at the conclusion of the festival. Finally, you can help keep the festival free by making a tax-deductible donation to the South Dakota Humanities Council. Just visit our website, sdhumanities.org, and click the donate button. This festival would not be possible without the generous support of the numerous organizations and individuals who have already donated and are acknowledged on the back cover of the festival guide and on our website. And now on with the show. This program is called The Hidden Joys and Unseen Challenges of the Artistic Life, featuring Kent Nerburn. Kent Nerburn has written 16 books, including the 2019 one-book South Dakota, Neither Wolf Nor Dog. He has appeared on C-SPAN, the History Channel, and PBS, where his work was featured in the documentary Sculpting in Wood and Words. Nerburn believes that Native peoples, as the elder cultures on this land, have much to teach us all, and that we must learn from them to develop an authentic American spirituality and a true understanding of this land. Kent, it's all you.
All right. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Am I there? All right. Hello, everybody. I see many names, a few faces. Thanks for coming by into my little cyber world here. I should say from the outset that the proverbial frog seems to have taken up residence in my throat, and I have myself a glass of water to try to chase him or her away. But if you hear me hacking or cacking or stopping for a minute, blame the frog. But that's not what I'm here for. What I'm here to do is to talk to you about a rather interesting book. At least it was interesting for me to write. Now, I'm different than a lot of the authors that you're going to, that you probably know through this festival and other places, because I see myself first and foremost as a teacher. There is one person here who I share that feeling with, and that's Joe Marshall, who tries always through his works to teach through the vehicle of storytelling and historical creation. I think that teachers are the most important things in the world. And I teach through my books, not necessarily from a lectern. And those that know me, I mean, some of you may have just stumbled in here for something to do. Some of you may know my work. And those of you who do know my work know that it's mostly been in the bridge between Native American and non-Native cultures. Probably best known for my trilogy, that Ryan mentioned, Neither Wolf Nor Dog, which was the South Dakota Book of the Year in 2019. The Wolf at Twilight, which talks about the boarding school experience, and The Girl Who Sang to the Buffalo, which tries to take us up to the edge of deep Native spirituality and places where there's truth to be had, but we as non-native people and many native people don't have a right to go. But I feel that I'm an ally and a translator. And that's what I have been trying to do for the last 20 years of my life. So in that case, The Artist's Journey, the book that I'm talking about now, which was originally titled Dancing with the Gods, would seem to be a departure. But actually it's not. Let's go back a few years to my 60th birthday. I was in Pine Ridge. I was invited to a sweat lodge. We went in that sweat lodge, and you bare your heart and soul when asked to do so. And I was asked what it was that I was praying for, as it were. And I said, I want to know how to be an elder. And I don't claim, nor do I even accept the possibility that I am Native American, that I would think as a Native American. That's to appropriate the understanding of other people, and I have no right to that. I have to be humble in the face of who they are and their knowledge. But it doesn't mean that I don't try to inform my understanding with the wisdom that I've gained in the years of working with them. And among the crucial pieces of wisdom that I've gained is the importance of the elder, that we who come from a dominant culture tend to think of the world and the life experience as sort of an arc. It starts with the child. There's the period of fecundity and productivity and midlife, and then you sort of slide off into a vestigial state or a state of retirement or repose. And this is a straight line approach to reality. For the Native people, it's not the case. Life is a cycle. It's a circle. It's seasons. And only those who have reached the last season have seen all the previous seasons. So they have a responsibility to look back and speak with clarity and intelligence about what they've seen in their passages through the seasons. And this, for me, is what, as an elder, I had to figure out how to do. So I thought about I have an obligation to give back. It's now my time of life to do something that I don't normally do. In my books, what I've always done is take you along with me. My whole approach has been to take you as a reader, and we go on a journey together. We look at the world that I see in front of me. I share a world with you, and we experience it together, and we draw conclusions. I may give you the benefits of my insights. I may leave it for you to decide, but ultimately, we're all facing in the same direction. When it comes time for an elder book, you have to do something else. You have to have the courage to turn around and face your audience with humility and clarity and say, this is what I've learned. This is what it's important that you should know from my life experience. I did one book called Voices in the Stones about what I had learned from working with the Native people. And I thought that was important. But I wanted to do something that spoke. That was another elder book that stood and that's faced my audience. But I wanted to do something that spoke from the totality of my life experience. I thought, what is it that I can talk about? What would be the honest elder book about what I've learned and what I need to share? Well, the answer came to me in the form of a letter that I received from a young woman named Jennifer. If you're an author of even the tiniest celebrity, such as I am, you get notes from people. They find your work and they say, this man or this woman must know something that I need to know. I would like to ask them for advice. And I'll get these letters from people periodically. And I got one from this woman named Jennifer. Jennifer was, she was probably in her teenage years, early 20s. And she said, I'd like to be a writer. I liked your writing. Is it possible? Is it possible to make a living? I feel lonely. I feel isolated. I feel like I have some talent. I don't think that anyone really understands me. Please, Mr. Nerburn, help. Well, that resonated very deeply with me because in 1970, when I was a graduate student at Stanford University, incredibly miserable, as many people are in the first year of graduate school, but partially just from my own life circumstances and confusion about things. I was studying in a department of religion, and we were studying religion as a theoretical exercise, studying, theories of soteriology in different cultures, comparative religion, analysis of religion, and it lacked a heartbeat. And I said, no, what I really want to do is I want to create, I want to write. And I was miserable at Stanford, didn't like the place, didn't like myself, didn't like anything about what I was doing. So I sat down one day and wrote a letter to Norman Mailer. Why Norman Mailer still is a mystery to me. I probably just read Armies of the Night, and I thought that he was an intelligent man, but not an intellectual. He managed to be smart and be a person of thoughtfulness and intellect, but also a person of the street. So I wrote this letter to Norman Mailer saying, please, can I come and work with you? Can I learn something from you? Well, Norman wrote back to me. I've kept that letter ever since. And he wrote me and basically said, that you may need to have all sorts of occupations, but there's no quick road to focus like working. It's part of the hurdle. In fact, it keeps most talented people from becoming real writers. Anyway, you wrote your letter so long ago, you're doubtless in a different mood. Hope this finds you well. If you're in doubt, work. Write more than you have been writing. It was a very simple letter, not a great deal to it other than he wrote it on his typewriter. He signed it. It was a personal letter. And like a drowning man, I grabbed onto this and said, someone out there acknowledges what I'm going through. And I really was a drowning man holding on to that, the flotsam and jetsam of my life, and that little piece of opportunity, of hope came to me in the terms of Norman Mailer's letter. Well, that resonated with me when I got Jennifer's letter. And I said, I should write a book. I started to write back to Jennifer. I actually wrote a letter back to her. But then I said, there's a lot of Jennifers out there. I was a Jennifer. There are Jennifers that write me. This particular Jennifer is just one of many. I should write a book about what it means to live the life of the artist. And I didn't want to do, too many of these books about the arts are, they're similar. They're either inspirational books about how we are all artists and we can all create great things, which is not true, or they're hagiographies of great artists and their brilliance, or they're how-to books about how to increase your creativity and improve your craft. I didn't want to do that. What I wanted to do is take you inside the creative experience and teach you something that all artists know. Because I've known a lot of artists. In 50 years, I was trained initially as a sculptor and spent 20 years as a sculptor before shifting to writing. I've known artists ranging from symphony cellists to rock stars to best-selling authors to Guggenheim-winning photographers, professional actors, dancers. I've had conversations with all of them. We've talked art and the creative process. And what I've learned from them is what I wanted to put in that book. What is common and what the deep experience of the arts is. Not the superficial experience, but the deep experience. And what I'd like to do is read you three pieces or selections from three pieces that reflect three areas of concern that I address in the book. But first, I'd like to make a fundamental distinction. Let me read a little bit here because this is always one of the real questions. And that is, I make a distinction between art and artistry. There is art and there is artistry, and they are not the same. Artistry is raising an act to a level of proficiency and clarity that allows it to shine with a brilliance that others performing the same act seldom achieve. It is seeing through to the heart of an activity and performing it with mindfulness and excellence. The artistry of the surgeon, the artistry of the homemaker, the artistry of the mechanic and the machinist are all expressions of this urge towards excellence. Art is something different. There's my frog. Art is something different. It is creating something unique, never before seen or heard. A child freshly born adding a new voice to the chorus of creation. It is fragile and moves on unsteady legs, uncertain of its place, or even if it has a place at all. It differs from artistry, and artistry is an elevation, a consecration of the ordinary. We do not confer the mantle of artist on the counselor or the surgeon or the homemaker or the carpenter because we do not see what they do as fitting into our definition of art. We grant them competence and excellence, worthy attributions to be sure, but we do not accord their accomplishments the same status we give to a novelist or a dancer or a musician. But the teacher who knows the exact moment to challenge or praise a child, the mother who knows when to support and when to discipline, the father who knows when to let go and let a child fly free, are making choices every bit as artistic as the painter choosing a palette or the actor choosing a gesture. The cultures of the East have understood this for centuries and have a broader, more pervasive view of the artistic life. If you embrace, as they do, the understanding of art as the elevation of the ordinary to the level of the singular and the unique, all pursuits in life have the potential for artistry within them. And I really believe that there is artistry in all of life, but this is separate, a cousin to, or a sibling to the act of actual creation ex nihilo, out of nothing. And that was who I wanted to write to. That is what I wanted to write about, was the art of the act of bringing something new into the world. Art is the act of bringing something new into the world in terms of as an interpretation, as a novel, as a painting, as something where you are creating from nothing. And the strange experience that is, the strange and joyful experience that is. So I wrote about several different, not really categories, but I just tried to touch on several areas of concern that matter in creation of art. And the first one is the practical and the obvious realities that everyone thinks about when they're dealing with the creation of creative art. And the first one is making a living, and the second one is getting rejected. On making a living, and I wrote about this in the chapter called The Dark Companion, because money is the dark companion in the life of the arts. There's an ironclad truth that bills are consistent, but income is not. And this creates a feeling of insecurity in almost every artist who's trying to make a living in the arts. I have a man that I've worked with from Hollywood who is he may not be the man, he's a creative manager or something of Jim Carrey. And he talks about how Jim Carrey is constantly insecure about this. You don't know where the next paycheck is coming from. You don't know what the next thing is that you can do that will work. So you have this constant insecurity, and it's no matter how successful you get, it's ground into you. And it's important to find a way to have to address this. And I talk about that in the book about, you really have two choices. You can do something related to your art in, say, if you're a writer, you can do journalism on the side, or you can teach writing, or you can teach English, but you can do something that's related, but then you run the risk of dissipating your creative energy into this lesser version of the art that you want to create. The other route you can go is to husband your creative energy and do something completely unrelated. But then you risk having your mind and heart taken over by where you put your time, because we become where we put our time. And I write about this at some length in the book because this is what happened to me. I took a year making my living driving a cab, which had a power and an immediacy that took away from my capacity. At that time, I was working in sculpture, to focus on sculpture, because every time I went to do something in sculpture, and sculpting requires a very focused capacity to think in shadow, light, form. All the events of the day, all the events of the cab driving experience intervened, and I couldn't think clearly. So I've had to make decisions. We all have to make those decisions. Do you stay close to your art and risk dissipating your creative energies, or do you go far from your art and find out that your spirit is being stolen by something that is really not important to you, but is filling up your time and your days? But that's not what I wanted to read to you about. I thought what I wanted to do is read to you about rejection, because rejection is really something that's part of every artist's life. And you have to get used to it, and it never feels good. So let me read here. It is, all right. You will not have to journey far along the path of the artistic life before you receive a note or a phone call or a manuscript you submitted, an audition you made, or a competition you entered. It will begin something like this. Thank you for sharing your work with us. Unfortunately, and it will go on from there. This rejection will hit you like a blow because your expectation was filled with hope, and hope is life. All the emotions of grief will well up in you, anger, disbelief, and a lonely private sadness. Perhaps you will be resilient and take the blow with grace. Perhaps you will be fragile and unsure, and will find in the rejection a confirmation of your greatest fears, that you are mediocre and without talent. Perhaps you will believe, if only for a moment, that the struggle is not worth pursuing and you will want to quit. You must remember that any creative act involves great emotional risk. As an artist, you've taken something from deep within yourself and placed it out for the world to see. You've exercised an act of courage, putting forth a part of your heart, something invested with your fondest hopes, and given it the best of which you are capable. You have laid it out, innocent and vulnerable, hoping that it will be loved in the same measure as the love with which it was created. It is new, fresh, filled with bright hope, unprepared for the bright sunlight of harsh scrutiny. When it is rejected, and this rejection can come as a rebuke by someone of professional significance, or the merest glance or lack of enthusiasm by someone you love and trust, there's a feeling of desolation that can cut to the very core of your being. How deep it runs and how fully it overwhelms you depends on your own emotional makeup and confidence in the strength of your own vision. I cannot tell you how to respond to rejection. I can only tell you that it will come, that you must be prepared to deal with it, and that you must not let it defeat you. Keep in mind that rejection is not the same as failure. Rejection merely means that someone, rightly or wrongly, did not find value in your work. It could happen because what you did not meet their emotional and intellectual needs. It could come because they did not see clearly what you were attempting. It could come because they were having a bad day and were not emotionally present to your work. It can have any of 100 sources. Failure only comes when you allow rejection to defeat you. And this is something you should never allow to happen. Remember that in choosing to create, you have acted with a rare courage. You have let down the mask. You have called forth your best self. You have taken a chance and revealed your heart to the world. This, no matter how struggling and unformed the creation it brings forth, is a praiseworthy act. For all creation is an act of love, and in the merest making of your art, you have, in your own small way, made the world a little richer, a little warmer, and a little more filled with love. And for that, you need feel no shame and make no apology, no matter what others say about your work. And just an interesting personal little note, I was looking for some examples of something that were the rejections I've received, and I've received many of them. And this is a little more about criticism than rejection, although I wrote a section on criticism and what critical mindset does to you. But here are two responses to the trilogy, just little sentences of the books in the trilogy, Now the Wolf and the Dog, Wolf of Twilight, and Gorilla Saving the Buffalo. Here's one person's voice. The writing was incredible, not just the content, but the actual writing. I have never enjoyed the creativity of the written word as much as this book. I'll take it, sounds good. But here's number two. The book is easy to read, too easy in fact. I found myself lulled into boredom by repetitive descriptions involving two adjectives modifying a noun. I don't think Nerburn intended these to be incantational. I think they're evidence of tired, plotting, unimaginative writing. There it is. That's the way it is for criticism, and it's also the way it is for rejections. You don't know what is going to touch someone, what is going to set them off positively or negatively. And when I come across this, I always think back to one of the important Buddhas in my life, my dog Curtis. When I was working as a sculptor, I was working on a life-size log in the studio I had. And I was struggling with the sculpture, and I brought Curtis to the studio one day. And Curtis came in, sniffed around, walked over, lifted his leg, and peed on the log, peed on my sculpture. And that's when I knew that everyone was a critic, and I couldn't take them all terribly seriously. So the criticism and rejection is something you have to learn to live with. And criticism hurts more than praise helps. I can assure you that most people, most artists feel that way, because Praise you can never entirely trust, whereas for some reason you think that criticism has a certain authenticity to it, that they've seen something, and you're forced to look hard at yourself. There's good criticism, there's bad criticism, there's legitimate rejections, and there are ridiculous rejections. But I think, again, to another wise man, a vacuum cleaner salesman I once met, who said, if I took rejection as seriously as you writers do, I'd never wake up and go out for another day. Because he says, I experience rejection 5, 6, 7, 10 times a day. Rejection is hard because we invest so much of ourselves in the act of creation. The second area that I'd like to mention is the inner challenges of the work of the artist's life. And this is really, to me, the meat of the issue, because these are the things where I try to talk about issues that don't always get talked about. The fine line between inspiration and craft, for example. The power of accident. There's a section I write called The Architect and the Gardener, which represent, you can imagine what each of those represent as ways to create. And that was built around a young actor friend of mine who was in the Magnificent Seven remake with Morgan Freeman. And Morgan Freeman, he was trying to build this character. And I forget exactly what had happened, but Morgan Freeman came up and said to him, you can't plan for magic. You have to just let it happen. And accident and magic are near kin. You have to be open to the possibility of magic. And yet at the same time, there are those who build architectural structures and follow them out in their painting, in their creation of a character, in their writing, and they come to the end very successfully. But the inner challenge that I want to talk about, or read you a little bit about, is what I call the dilemma of time. And time is a very, very odd element in the creation of art. First of all, in arts like writing and painting, writing being probably the easiest manifestation because it's linear, the person that comes to the end is different than the person that started at the beginning. You change, the work changes, and you have to know when to stop. You cannot think that this is all going to be of a piece. Anything you write is going to be organic. It's going to change in the process of going from idea to actuality because it takes place over time and you change over time. So here's a little bit about writing, because there's another way that writing touches us. And it's an issue of timing that challenges us in an even more insidious way. It comes on subtly, almost unnoticed, like the changing of the tides or the turning of the seasons. It happens like this. You have labored on your work with single-minded intensity, entering into it every day with all the artistic energy at your command. You try on one idea after another. You winnow the choices before you little by little, searching for that one moment when the less becomes the more. You are fascinated with its possibilities and driven by the vision of what your work might yet be. It's at the center of your life. Then one day, for no apparent reason, you wake up and find yourself oddly disinterested in the task. You feel distracted, almost disengaged. You have no focus. Your mind begins to wander. Other artistic projects begin to creep into your thoughts. The work you once wore like a second skin seems somehow distant and uninvolving. You have come to one of the artist's most feared moments. You are done, but the work is not finished. And I'm facing this right now. I said at the start of the pandemic, I said, I'm going to write a novel. I'm going to go deep down into the bowels of my brain, my psyche, my house, and I'm going to write a novel. I'm going to take the whole time of the pandemic. And I didn't know exactly how I wanted to do it. I didn't want to shape them. I wanted to let the characters develop themselves. I wanted them to find their way. I wanted the book to take an organic form. Well, I reached the point very recently where I'm done with this book, but the book isn't done. And that's a terrible time to reach, because you have to then decide, how are you going to try to finish this thing where you don't know what authenticity is anymore? Do you finish it with craft? Do you finish it with guile? How do you try to deal with this? And the way that I write about it here is that, let's see, yeah. Unlike the dilemma of not knowing when your work is complete, you now wonder if you will be able to complete it at all. You become immobilized, not by confusion, but by indifference. Though these would seem to be almost opposite emotional conditions, they're both expressions of a similar creative malady. You're spiritually exhausted. You have allowed your artistic preoccupation to overtake you, and your work is gasping for air. The first instinct when you encounter these creative impasses is to try to push past them. Work harder, you tell yourself. Stay the course. This is a failure of discipline on my part. But discipline is not always an antidote to spiritual exhaustion. There are times when stepping back and letting your work breathe is the best thing you can do. The words of the Tao Te Ching speak clearly about this matter. Trying to grasp things, you lose them. Forcing a project to completion, you ruin what was almost right. You don't want to ruin your work by forcing it to an untimely completion, just as you don't want to ruin your work by laboring it to death or abandoning it too soon. You want it to ripen in the fullness of its own time. A creation, after all, is a birth. You can't force that birth by ceaseless effort. None of us knows what the exact moment when our creation wants to be born. And none of us knows the process by which it arrives at that moment. From the first second of its conception, it has been struggling to get free from you and to take on a life of its own. The Taoists have another saying that is also well worth considering. Love, they say, is creating without owning. If you truly love your work, you must learn to create without owning it. You must learn not to confuse your preoccupation with bringing it to life and the natural ripening process of the creation itself. When you feel you have lost touch with your work, or your work has lost touch with you, or it merely means that you have gotten out of step with the natural rhythms of its creation. It wants to breathe, but you are smothering it with your labors and your love. This is the moment when you need to take a step back. All decisions seem ever more critical as a work nears completion because the weight of finality hangs over every choice. But the truth is that when you reach this stage, the great mass of your work is already done. Your creation is no longer seeking form, it is seeking clarity. What you need now is the discipline of patience, not the discipline to work harder or longer. A work needs to relax toward finality. It cannot be pushed, it cannot be worried, it cannot be analyzed to completion. Pushing it against the natural rhythms of creation will just churn up the waters. Clarity comes only when the waters settle and the air clears. There are times when the most productive act is to do nothing. This is one of them. You need to step back, let your work breathe, to watch it rather than try to control it. Let it recede from you until you can admire it for what it is rather than worrying about what you think it yet could be. You've not lost it, and it has not escaped from you. You are just looking at it too closely and trying to hold it too tightly. Let it fly free. Soon enough, at a time of its own choosing, like a wandering child, it will return to its origins and show itself to you anew. Then, seeing it clearly once again, you will be able to guide it safely home. And I cannot emphasize this enough. The step back is sometimes the most important thing to do in any creative process because we get so close to it. We start inside of it and gradually move out, but we never get far enough away from it to be able to look at it and allow it to breathe and aspirate the way that it has to be understood as an external creation. So there comes a time when the hardest thing to do is to step back, leave it alone, and say it'll come to its creative fullness in the fullness of time, and nothing I can do will hurry that. The third area of concern that I want to talk about, or write a little bit about, is the psychological and spiritual significance of the arts in people's lives. The arts do some amazing things. One of them is they link you with all artists, past and present. Sometimes you find yourself being a closer friend to artists artists in your medium who lived hundreds of years ago than you are to your own family. You carry on dialogues with them. You learn from them. They become your teachers. And this is a rare, rare experience that only artists really have in that way. They are friends with the past. They are friends with people in other parts of the world because it's a common language and it has a continuity over time. Another thing is that, one of the things I like that's starting to become relevant to me is artists don't get old. They get weird. but they don't get old. And the reason they don't get old is because though their bodies age, the skill of an artist is curiosity in any medium. They have to know how to see or hear. They have to take in things through their senses. A painter sees color. A musician hears pauses. A writer picks and chooses from the reality out there, very often hearing the spaces in conversations, observing the world in order to describe it. This never goes away. And you look at people like Georgia O'Keeffe, when her eyesight eventually went out, she turned to sculpture because she said, I can venice at the distance of my hands, not at the distance of my eyes. Monet's water lilies are the work of someone whose eyesight was going. Artists don't stop being curious. They don't stop trying to create. They don't stop trying to understand the world in artistic terms. So they don't reach that state of staleness that many people who have done a job that they don't really like reach at the end, where they say, I just want to be done with it. I want to do nothing. Artists are always creating. And like I said, sometimes that produces some very crazy folks, but I enjoy the crazy old folks more than I enjoy those who are just sitting around being and complaining. And I hope that as a writer, I would much rather be a crazy person than a grumpy one. And so anyway, it's one of those little skill things you learn about the arts. As the older you get, the happier you are that you were involved in the arts, because it keeps you open to the world in a way that you wouldn't have been otherwise. But what I'd like to read you from is, this is the last thing I'll read you of any consequence. It's from the coda of the book called Expressing the Inexpressible. And the start of that section is a quote from Emily Dickinson, who says, if I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. So here now, let me leave you with a story from my own life. It is as close as I can come to telling you why this artistic life matters and why you should embrace it. As my mother lay dying, I was overcome with a grief and a pain that was beyond anything within my imagining. I could cry, I could rail against the universe, I could sob and grieve and plead and pray, but I could do nothing to change the reality of her passing. I was drowning, and when we are drowning, we grasp at what we can. I'm a writer, so I did what a writer does. I wrote. I had no other voice for what was inside of me. Had I been a runner, I could have run. A singer, I could have sung. A cellist, I could have made my instrument cry. But I was a writer. That was all I had to give. So I left my mother's bedside and walked outside to stare at the sky and get away just for a moment from the weight of that room that was so filled with her dying. And I wrote. Here's what I said. This is what is hardest, to be outside, to see the sun, the clouds, and now that you are inside a room, inside yourself, too occupied with your dying and too weak to be brought out into the simple beauty of the daylight. I do not want to have this pleasure. I want you to have this pleasure. I want you to feel the breeze, to see the stars, to sense the warm touch of the wind, not the cold edge of sterile sheets. How is it we must become so small in our dying, concerned with such things as drawing a breath or moving a hand? Why is it we cannot expand into the infinite before our final passage, to have a glimpse of what is before us, rather than only the oppressive weight of what we are leaving? Perhaps you're having that glimpse. I do not know. I know only that the immediacy of pain is claiming the surface of your mind. These are not the memories I want of you, and those are not the thoughts I want to occupy your passage. I want this to be a golden transit, a loosing of the bonds, a release, like the discarding of a gossamer veil. I want to set you free. I want to see you set free, like the souls of the dead in medieval paintings, flying upward to a God unquestioned, to be taken in eternal embrace and given easy rest. I want there to be relatives, ancestors, the open arms of your parents, old pets, old friends. I want this to be a reunion of all who have passed, not a descent into darkness. Yes, it is light that I want. Light, not darkness. Yet death feels like the coming of night. Is this me, or is this how it is? It does not matter so long as your passage is into peace. What remains for us behind is but the bones and shards, slowly reconfigured into memories and meaning. We will do fine here with the roof ripped off our days, and we will find the earth again. But what will you find as you fly free? Who will you become? And what will we know of each other across this dark veil? Remember Father's passing. not so many years ago, and the transformation of his infirm presence in the memory of strength and goodness. I remember feeling in my grief that instant when he entered into me, not like a spirit, but like a presence, infusing my whole being with something that I had not known before. That instant, I became him. I watch you now as you labor in your final breaths, and wonder how it will be when you are set free, when I become you. I wrote until the fire burned out. Then I went back and sat by my mother, dying. Out of the pain and tears, this was what I could create. It did not even begin to articulate the cry in my heart, but this is what I could do. And it was the artist speaking, not the author, not the writer of books, the artist. It was a man taking such tools as were at his command and using them to shape the unspeakable into something that had external form. It was me trying to do with my art what art does best, express the inexpressible. In its own way, my desolate cry into the void was no different than a teenager pouring out poems of love or grief in the private darkness of a lonely night, or a child sobbing for the loss of a pet. That I had more tools at my command was of no significance. It was not about what I created, it was about the unburdening, the use of art to give shape to the shapeless. Our lives are governed by necessity and practicality, our days laden with burdens and obligations. It is where the foot walks, not where the heart sings. And then suddenly, there is a moment. A mother dies. We fall in love. A child is born. A sunset reduces us to tears. Feelings come to us, honest feelings, human feelings, feelings that do not fit inside our square-cornered life. We want to cry out from joy, from terror, from grief, from some emotion that wells up and overwhelms us. And we are, for a moment, in a place that has no shape and no edges, a place that expands toward the infinite and breaks all bonds of human understanding. This is when we turn to art, because art can give shape to that moment. Art gave me a way to grieve my mother. Art can allow you to sing the birth of a child or dance the joy of a fresh and overwhelming love. If we are fortunate enough to have the tools to create art that gives form to that moment, it's a treasure beyond compare. If we are able to shape that moment in a way that communicates to others, we're twice blessed. To affirm, to articulate, to console, to inspire, these are the great gifts of the arts. They let the light shine through the confusion of life and remind us that there is something more, a mystery that can only be touched but never understood. But above all, they provide the greatest gift that any experience can offer. They tell us that we are part of the human family. So that's a sketch of this book, some of the things that are in it. It's hard for me to choose because I care deeply about this book, and I think that I said a lot of things in there that are important to be said to the person who is trying to make a life or understand the world through the arts. It's a book that I poured my heart into for all the young Jennifers, for all those who are coming back to the arts that they abandoned years ago to the responsibilities of making a living and raising families, to all those who are picking up a camera or a brush or sitting themselves down at a keyboard for the first time, wondering if they have something to say or the ability to say it. This book is for all of you. And I'd like to leave you just with a short passage of what I wrote to Jennifer. So back to the beginning. The letter that I sent back to her, here's a little section. You will live in a world of uncertainty, never knowing if your creations are good enough, always fearing financial cataclysm, unsure if your dreams are more than self-delusion and vulnerable to feelings of persecution and self-doubt. You will see others with less talent accomplishing more and feeling the sting of unwanted criticism. You will feel angry, lonely, unappreciated, and misunderstood. But you will also live in a world of joy with its magical moments when the act of creation lifts you and propels you with a power that seems to come from beyond yourself. You will remain constantly vibrant and young at heart because your urge to create will keep your spirit alive and interested in the world around you long after others in other professions have become weary and soul deadened in the monotonous sameness of their everyday life. And you will own your own time and know the miraculous experience of having intimate conversations with people long dead and far away through your personal dialogue with their art. You will know what it is to work with love. Few people on the outside will understand the precariousness nature of this life. They will see only the accolades and accomplishments, the apparent freedom, and the finished products of the efforts. They will not understand that the person who creates something from the intimacy of their own imagination and places it before others as a gift of the creative spirit stands on the precipice of failure and rejection, or worse yet, mediocrity at every moment. That by creating a work of art, a performance, a painting, a piece of writing, or anything else, you have, metaphorically speaking, brought a child into the world. And the rejection of a child of your creation hurts you with the pain of a parent watching their child be ignored, demeaned, and seen as unworthy. These are things you will come to know if you devote yourself to a life in the arts. It's not a life for everyone, but if you have the courage to choose it, you will have embarked upon one of life's great adventures. You have joined the tribe of the dreamers, the keepers of the stories, the shapers of visions, and caretakers of the imagination. You have chosen to set your sights on the stars. Well, it's a lot of reading, a lot of thinking. But that's the book that I want to share with you. It's not a normal book for Kent, but I cared about it. And if it touches, like Emily Dickinson says, if it touches just one person, that's what matters. So, Jennifer, if you're out there, that one was for you.
Well, thank you, Kent. That was wonderful. Does anybody have any questions at this point? I guess I have a question that I'd like to ask, and we can see if any others pop up. Kent, you're kind of in a unique position, having been a sculptor and an author. Can you talk a little bit about the differences and similarities in the creative process between those two?
Truly, there are similarities and differences, and the similarity is that, again, that you are creating out of nothing, and that you have to. Michelangelo said there are knaves, cunning knaves, and good people, and you want to be a good person when you create any art form. You want to have an authenticity in yourself, and you're working from your best self as a creator at any point, and you're having to take the true stuff of an artist is what he or she takes in from the outside world. It's all about translation. What the artist takes in is what they translate. The way they translate it is the medium they choose. When I studied, I actually switched from sculpture to writing because of what the nature of the focus was that each demanded. As a sculptor, I was working on single images, and I worked by hand with hand chisels in big blocks of wood, and in a tree trunk. And let's say I was making an image of for my doctorate, I had to do an image of John the Baptist. Okay, to do that, I have to enter into that being, that character, and even if it was just a figure, I had to enter into that. I had to think like that being, like that person. Like that entity that I was creating. I had to see in light. I had to see in shadow. I had to clarify my understanding of what it was I was trying to create. And I couldn't let anything come in from the outside because everything I did had the possibility of death within it. I was working subtractively. And subtractive art form, you don't have the capacity you don't have a eraser, you don't get a redo. So everything became absolutely critical. Everything was on the edge of life and death. And I found that when I got involved with a family and marriage, I couldn't sculpt. I couldn't sculpt in the way that I wanted to because it was a non-relational art form. Whereas writing ultimately is a relational art form. What you pick up, you're not looking at light and shadow and trying to clarify a single vision. You're taking in information about the way people talk, the way they act, the world that they live in. And so it was a different modality in taking it out, but the modality in putting it out, but the modality of writing, yes, there's a craft of writing, but the modality of writing requires openness to the entire richness of human creation, whereas the modality of sculpture required me to focus exclusively on the object and had me keep all of those away. It was a non-relational art form. And I frankly just couldn't continue it as I was, when I got involved with family life and wife and kids, because I couldn't turn one off and on quickly enough and sufficiently enough to go back to the sculpting in a way that gave it the life that I needed to give it.
Well, that's very interesting. Unfortunately, we're about at our time here. I might just read a couple more comments here from the chat. Jody says, "Thank you so much for writing this and reading it to us. Your comments have resonated so deeply for me." Deborah says, "Just wonderful. I have to buy this book." And Terry says, "An observation. Your comments about the stalled project requires patience, and often just leaving it alone reminds me of the scene in Men in Black where Agent J tells Will Smith's character, 'Let's have some pie,' when they have reached a dead end."
Who can argue with it? Let's have some pie.
Right. Well, thank you everybody for attending on behalf of the South Dakota Humanities Council. Thanks to Kent for sharing his expertise. And thanks to all of you in the Zoom and Facebook audiences for attending this event. Don't forget to visit our website, sdbookfestival.com/virtual, for more great programming to come through the virtual 2021 South Dakota Festival of Books. So thank you, Kent, and we will see you all at the next session, perhaps.
Good to hear from you. Good to see you. Good to be able to talk to you. Thank you much. It's a wonderful book festival. I hope you all know that the South Dakota Festival of Books is one of the most intimate and friendly and approachable festivals you can go to. Go to it every year if you possibly can.